This is supposed to be, they tell us over and over again, and almost at the risk of sounding like a cliche, the best time to have a startup in India, the best time to be an entrepreneur in India. The government's looking at the space closely. We know individuals, of course, very excited on it. The world, we are told, is watching the Indian startup space closely. And of course, our very own corporates also now stepping up the challenge. They're getting involved in a whole host of ways in the startup space, be it to encourage innovation, be it look at where the issues of funding are concerned, and also to try their own hands in the startup space. What more proof of the excitement that this space is now generating? Well, that's what we're looking at today, the role of corporates and just what more needs to be done. With me, a very special panel, Dr. Nagi Pillai, MD of Mahindra First Choice Wheels, with us in the Delhi studio, as is Nidhi Agarwal, founder, Karya.com, a brand of Western wear for women. Joining us from Bangalore, Ravi Narayan, director at Microsoft Ventures, and also Ashok Madravali, deputy director at NASSCOM. Thanks all so much for taking our time to speak to us. Dr. Pillai, first up with you. What do you believe is the biggest thing, the biggest reason, or what is the one big thing that corporates bring to the table when we talk about startups?
Society believed that innovation has to come from big industries and established companies, and that was the trend for a long time. And it was primarily because of resources. And then if you look at the transition with technology and internet and all of that, suddenly the capital requirements to start new businesses dropped, and there was a lot more opportunity to innovate. And what that led to a whole host of venture capital firms bringing capital in and attracting talent. So a lot of the innovation moved to the so-called startups and smaller companies. And what happened was the big establishments and the corporates started focusing on what we call execution and efficiency and so on. But I think there's a new phase coming in where the resources are still there. And I think the corporates are realizing that just execution and efficiency are not enough. You have to push innovation.
Right.
And I think
that's, of course, being very key. You have to push innovation. Ravi Narayan, sir, if I could just ask you, this is a time when there's so much focus on building great companies. Now, the example that Dr. Pillai talked about just now, that it's just not enough really to do what you're doing, to be comfortable in your own space. Innovation is the name of the game. To build great companies, you need to innovate, you need to be out there. Is that, of course, one of the key areas that you believe that corporates can step up? And what do you believe is the one area that they haven't looked at enough, which they should now start focusing on a lot more?
Microsoft has been very interested in the startup ecosystem space now for quite some time. And in the last 3 years, we have doubled down on India and the China market because we felt there were lots of interesting business models, a lot of technology innovations that are going to come out of India. Technology innovation, especially in the mobile first and mobile only space, is something that has started emerging from here and will continue to emerge from here. And there's going to be a very interesting set of opportunities that open up when you are able to sit here in India but are able to serve the global markets using the cloud as an infrastructure. So from that standpoint, the low cost infrastructures but very, very innovative solutions that have been hardened by the markets that are not as simple and as easy as India to actually go and get onto the global stage is what is most interesting for us, and therefore we've been investing quite a bit in building our presence here and building our engagement with the startup ecosystem, be it the startups or the VCs.
Nidhi, when we talk about, we're speaking briefly about innovation, we've spoken that, how India is the space that people are watching, the example of Microsoft that you just been given. Now, in your own experience, we know that, funding was, of course, one issue. But how do you believe the presence of a corporate could have helped? Because, in all my experience in speaking to startups, people wanting to start up, they've said, sometimes funding is a big issue and sometimes not. But sometimes you just want someone out there to hold your hand, to take you through the works as it were. Someone who's sort of been there, done that.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I think having a corporate in that investor scene certainly helps with resourcefulness and, mitigates that recurring problem of funding, because there is an active pipeline of resources that enable this particular startup to, run faster. But I think the other part of this is governance, right? In the hurry to scale up or to establish a startup, a lot of things could go amiss and could not actually be set right from the very beginning. In which case, a startup, in our case, we had a very really established set of board of advisors who were actually corporate, who helped us establish that governance in place and establish that process or those policies in place, which actually became the secret of our scalability.
So, Mr. Madhavali, come in here. Would it be then fair to say it's not just one or two things that a corporate would bring to the table? There's so much more. There's experience, there's innovation, there's of course the problems of funding. So really a 360-degree approach where you know, startups and young entrepreneurs can get some hand-holding, can get some direction with the role of people that we're seeing on the panel there, and of course so many more really step up.
But what we did, particularly in 2015, was we set up the Industry Partner Program, which is a program focused on helping early stage companies get access to large corporates for strategic benefits. So this could be for vendor partnering, this could be for mergers and acquisitions, it could be for talent acquisition, and that program has taken off really well. We've been working with close to 25 industry with 25 corporates across the country, and as of now, I can from the first year of this program, we have about 10 pilots that are operational with these large corporates, a couple of acquisitions in the making, which I cannot talk about at this point. But clearly the program has been really successful.
Which is why, sir, their role is now being underscored. But Mr. Narayan, when you speak to, when you talk about building companies of value, when you talk about holding hands, when you talk about being upbeat on the India story, now there are all those, of course, like Nidhi, who are talking about how they can benefit from this kind of experience. What has been, in your own experience of sort of dealing with all these companies, dealing with these startups, on the areas that you believe that, we need to focus on closely?
The tech startups are building great technologies. These people are inherently great technologists, so they understand how to build solutions. The question is, what are the problems that they're trying to solve?
Right.
So that's where, an access to the customer base that Ashok just mentioned earlier is very important. To find a ready-made set of customers who will either give early feedback to tell you whether you're building the right products, to actually having built the right product, actually how to take this across globally is a big thing from a startup standpoint. Right. Interestingly, from the other side as well, the corporates, as in our own customers in Microsoft, seem to be wanting to get onto this startup bandwagon. They want to get innovative, they want to get creative, they want to be disruptive in their own business models as they go along. And they can do this with business as usual. So they come to Microsoft and say, you've been working a lot with startups, and is there a way that we can actually start collaborating? So we created this very interesting platform called Co-Innovate, where we actually bring both the startups and the corporates to actually this platform, and they get to interact through a very curated mechanism, and they create some very disruptive solutions, because now suddenly they have the same agenda, which is innovation, and they have the same opportunity to create something that is discontinuous and disruptive.
Co-innovate, co-create, really being the mantra really of the day. Do you believe that, let me just try and rephrase that. What do you think was missing for you? Now you sort of could say that you had people in governance, that was a big help, funding and the issues of that was sorted out. But if I were to just say the two things that if you had, right at the beginning, would have made it easier for you, what would they have been?
Actually, it was team and funding. So now that funding is out of the way, in a certain sense, I think any startup goes through that motion over and over again. But I think the other piece is access to talent, right? Very interestingly, in India, even today, a lot of talent will actually gravitate towards established names, right? And a startup is not an established name just from the get-go, just by the virtue of the definition of a startup. So I think getting connected with a established corporate name would certainly help attract talent, which to a startup is the second biggest challenge once funding is mitigated, right?
Right. That's an important point. So there's, we're looking at this, it seems that, like I said, a real 360-degree approach. There are all the boxes that perhaps corporates can tick for startups, with the hand-holding, the mentorship, the guidance, the team building, and of course, funding.
No, absolutely, and also the brand. When in a business like ours where we're trying to build a consumer brand, I think it provides us great leverage when we are starting out and trying to create, let's say, a used car business where the trust deficit is so high, and you have instant credibility. And it takes a lot of investment. So that's the other benefit good corporates with good branding can bring to the table. Plus all the infrastructure that we can leverage off. Like she mentioned, governance. You know, just being a part of a very high governance organization, I don't worry about that in some sense, and that is a very crucial issue because in the hurry to grow, in the hurry you can leave you know, things by the wayside, and it sort of catches up with you later. And I think those things we don't worry about. But on the talent piece, what I'll say is that it cuts both ways. I think on one hand you have young talent who want to go to startups and who don't want to go to necessarily. So I think the challenge of corporates is that how do you create that environment to attract that cutting edge talent, and I think that takes a little bit of change in attitude as well. It's not just about being an established corporate, but also establishing that startup culture in a corporate environment, which I think we have made a lot of progress on in attracting the talent, whether it's equity, whether it's the freedom, whether it's the structure, whether it's the process. And we're trying to create that environment, and I think it's beginning to work, but it takes some work to get that done.
Right.
Well, I feel like you cannot create a startup environment. It's almost like you have to create a startup and the environment is a startup environment. So for example, for Karya, should a established apparel brand say, yes, we're supporting Karya, then Karya automatically gets cited as a startup that is going to show perpetuity, right? And the only worry that anybody has about about joining a startup is perpetuity and continuation of employment, right?
Mr. Naran, if you've managed to hear the discussion, would you like to jump in at this stage? How much is too much? Is there a place where really is there a point where you say this is way too much, you're expecting too much, or is everything really on the table?
Well, I think, you know, there's always this 80-20 rule that I talk about in any startup environment. And a startup in the very early stages is 80% innovation, 20%, you know, trying to make some sense out of it. And then there's then it flips somewhere in the life of a startup where 80% becomes the business as usual, and 20% is always going to be innovation. So if you are able to strike that balance at steady state, I think you have reached a startup kind of a culture. You know, there are large corporations that are aspiring to be startups. Why are they looking to be startups? Because they want to bring that innovation piece into that. But the goodness about that is there is scale, there is steadiness, there is growth that is happening in the 80%. So they continue to grow, they continue to meet their quarterly targets, and they continue to provide that consistency that is necessary for not just themselves, but for everybody around them to actually grow. But they shouldn't take their eyes off of 20% that is always about what is better that I can do now, what is the thing that could potentially be a leapfrog for me, you know, going forward.